She's labeled logistics, dismissed before she speaks. The old Sergeant Sneers' real pilots don't look like her, but stick around, because the simulation she's about to crush, she built it. They thought she was just another paper pusher. What they didn't know, she's the Night Osprey, the myth behind classified combat legends. And when she lands that impossible mission with cameras rolling, it won't just shatter records. It'll shatter careers, reputations, and everything they thought they knew about who belongs in the sky. The reckoning begins at 30,000 feet. Where in the world are you watching from? What time is it there? Let us know, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. In the dimly lit control room of the Advanced Flight Simulation Center, Sergeant James Holt stands tall, his weathered fingers drumming against the polished brass nameplate pinned to his chest. 20 years of running these tests have taught him to spot a fraud from a mile away, and something about this woman from logistics sets his teeth on edge. The simulation chamber's soft blue glow bathes her face as she runs her hands over the controls with a familiarity that makes his skin crawl. No logistics officer moves like that. The way her fingers dance across the startup sequence, it's too fluid, too intimate. Let me make this absolutely clear. Sergeant James Holt announces his voice carrying that special edge he reserves for moments before crushing someone's dreams. This is the Night Osprey simulation. We've had ace pilots, decorated veterans, even a few hotshots from NASA fail this scenario. It's designed to be impossible. The woman doesn't even blink. The constant hum of the simulator fills the silence between them. But there's something else in the air, a tension he hasn't felt in years. His chest tightens as she settles into the pilot's seat, with the grace of someone coming home. You understand the parameters, Sergeant James Holt demands, leaning forward. Nighttime carrier landing Category 5 hurricane conditions, complete systems failure, and a damaged left wing. She completes his sentence, her voice soft, but carrying an authority that makes him pause. Plus the classified parameters you haven't mentioned yet. The room temperature seems to drop several degrees. Sergeant James Holt's hand instinctively grips his nameplate tighter. How could she know about the classified conditions? Those aren't even in the briefing materials. The simulation powers up with its familiar whine, but today it sounds different, almost eager. The screen flickers to life, displaying the storm-ravaged night sky. A small crowd of technicians and junior officers has gathered behind the observation glass, drawn by the unusual tension in the air. Type challenge if you've ever faced someone who underestimated you. The words flash across the bottom of the screen as Sergeant James Holt's world begins to tilt. The woman's hands move across the controls with impossible precision. Not just skill, this is muscle memory. His throat tightens as realization begins to dawn. Who are you really? He demands. But she's already deep in the simulation, executing maneuvers he's only seen in classified footage. The truth hits him like a physical blow. Only one pilot has ever moved like this, ever known these exact parameters. The legendary Night Osprey. The mysterious pilot who revolutionized naval aviation with that impossible carrier landing 5 years ago. The incident that's now the basis for this very simulation. This isn't possible, Sergeant James Holt whispers, watching as she threads the virtual aircraft through conditions that have broken the best pilots in the service. You can't be... A small smile plays at the corner of her mouth as she executes a maneuver that's immediately familiar, because he spent years studying it in the footage of that famous night. His nameplate suddenly feels heavy against his chest, the weight of his assumptions crushing down on him. The simulation chamber falls silent except for the storm sounds from the speakers. Every eye is fixed on the main screen as she guides the crippled aircraft through the impossible approach. Sergeant James Holt's hands shake as he watches his carefully constructed world view begin to crumble. Will his 20 years of certainty survive the next 10 minutes? What happens when the impossible walks right through your door? Subscribe to find out how this legendary encounter ends. Night Osprey. As the carrier appears through the virtual storm clouds, Sergeant James Holt feels the weight of his nameplate like never before. In all his years of running this simulation, he's never felt more like an imposter himself. Every assumption, every dismissive comment he's ever made about female pilots, every time he's claimed to know what real pilots look like, it all comes crashing down around him as Captain Mara Kane, the Night Osprey herself, prepares to land. Officer James Holt grips his brass insignia tighter, the metal warm from 20 years of daily polishing. The pristine flight simulation chamber, his domain of absolute control, suddenly feels different today. Through the observation window, Captain Mara Kane's composed demeanor mocks his carefully constructed worldview. "I've evaluated over 3,000 pilots," he mutters to Lieutenant Chen, his most loyal subordinate. "Never been wrong about a single one." His fingers trace the worn edges of his insignia, a habit developed through decades of unquestioned authority. But something about this woman's quiet confidence sends an unfamiliar chill down his spine. The classified reports spread across his desk tell a story he refuses to accept. Night missions with impossible success rates, combat maneuvers that defy standard protocols, all attributed to a call sign he'd dismissed as military legend, the Night Osprey. Sir Chen ventures carefully. "There are studies from the Advanced Combat Division suggesting our traditional evaluation metrics might be—" He trails off as Holt's sharp glare cuts through him. Holt's mind drifts to Colonel Matthews, his mentor from 20 years ago, who'd taught him that authority meant never admitting doubt. "Women don't belong in combat aviation," Matthews had said, polishing his own brass insignia. "The science is clear on physical limitations, but the data streaming across his monitors contradicts everything he's built his career upon." Captain Kine's preliminary scores are breaking parameters he'd designed to be unbreakable. His fingers drum against the console, each tap echoing his growing unease. A memory surfaces his first day as lead evaluator, standing proud as Matthews handed him the facility's master key. "Trust your gut, son. These simulators separate the real pilots from the pretenders." Now watching Kine's calm preparation through the glass, his gut churns with uncertainty. Past evaluations flash through his mind. Pilots he'd failed, careers he'd ended, all based on his unshakable belief in traditional combat doctrine. How many potential Night Ospreys had he grounded? The thought makes his collar feel too tight. "Have you seen her record from the carrier groups in the Pacific?" Chen slides a tablet across the desk. Holt ignores it, but the numbers catch his eye anyway. Mission success rates that shouldn't be possible. Combat scenarios resolved in ways his simulators weren't programmed to recognize. The brass insignia feels heavier now. 20 years of certainty beginning to crack like old paint. In the simulator, Kane adjusts her helmet with practiced ease, showing none of the nervous tension he's accustomed to seeing in test candidates. Type doubt if you've ever questioned your deepest beliefs. He whispers to himself, a hollow echo of the confidence he'd possessed just hours ago. His secure terminal pings with urgent messages from command. More records unsealed, more impossible achievements verified. Each notification chips away at his carefully maintained world order. Through the observation window, Captain Keen turns and meets his gaze. Her slight nod carries no challenge, no defiance, just quiet knowledge. In that moment, Sergeant James Holt feels the weight of 2 decades of misjudgment pressing down on his shoulders. The simulator hums to life its familiar sound, now carrying a note of accusation. Everything he's built his reputation on, every evaluation he's given, every career he's judged, all of it balanced on assumptions that are crumbling beneath the weight of undeniable evidence. His brass insignia catches the light, reflecting a distorted image of a man facing the twilight of his certainty. In just 4 hours, his unshakable world has begun to tremble, and the Night Osprey hasn't even taken flight yet. The real test, he realizes with growing dread, isn't for Captain Keen at all. It's for everything he's ever believed about combat aviation, about capability, about his own infallible judgment. And as the simulation begins, Sergeant James Holt faces the terrifying possibility that he's been wrong all along. Sergeant James Holt's hands trembled as he gripped the simulator controls, watching helplessly as Captain Kine's aircraft danced through his supposedly unbeatable combat scenario. The fluorescent lights of the control room felt harsh against his clammy skin, each bead of sweat a testament to his crumbling authority. Impossible maneuver detected. The computer announced, yet the simulation continued. Sergeant James Holt's throat tightened. He'd designed these parameters himself, spent years perfecting them. Now, with each passing second, his reputation was dissolving like fog in morning sun. "She's exceeding the G-force limitations we thought were absolute," whispered Lieutenant Chen, one of the gathered instructors. Sergeant James Holt shot him a venomous glare, but Chen had already turned away, transfixed by the aerial ballet unfolding on the main screen. The weight of his instructor's insignia, usually a source of pride, now felt like lead against Sergeant James Holt's chest. He touched it reflexively, remembering the day he'd received it after establishing the unbeatable combat protocols. How many pilots had he failed using these same scenarios? How many careers had he judged based on standards that were now proving fundamentally flawed? A collective gasp filled the room as Captain Keen executed a maneuver that the simulator's programming struggled to even render. System recalibrating flashed across the screen. Sergeant James Holt's carefully constructed world was unraveling thread by thread. "Sir," his assistant called out, "social media is already buzzing. Someone leaked initial footage of the simulation results." Sergeant James Holt's blood ran cold as he saw Thuncher Night Osprey. Rises trending on military forums. His personal crusade against substandard pilots was about to become very, very public. The simulator's final scores flashed across the screen. Every single parameter exceeded, every limitation shattered. Sergeant James Holt's hand fell from his insignia as the weight of realization crashed down. He hadn't just been wrong about Captain Keen. He'd been wrong about everything. "Sergeant James Holt." Captain Kine's voice came through the intercom, calm and professional. "I believe we need to discuss the future of our training protocols." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. His kingdom of arbitrary standards and rigid rules was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. "I built my career on being right, on knowing exactly where the limits lay. But watching her soar beyond every boundary I'd drawn, I realized my greatest failure wasn't in the standards I'd set. It was in believing I had the right to set them at all. How many brilliant pilots did I ground because they didn't fit into my narrow view of excellence?" The doors to the simulator room opened, and Sergeant James Holt knew he would have to face not just Captain Keen, but the entire system he'd helped perpetuate. His fingers brushed against his insignia one last time, feeling its sharp edges. No longer a symbol of authority, but a reminder of his spectacular fall from grace. Drop a 1 in the comments if you've ever had your impossible standards shattered. The simulation data continued to stream across the screens, each new revelation another nail in the coffin of Sergeant James Holt's outdated doctrine. Tomorrow this would all be public. Tomorrow everything would change. But for now he stood frozen, watching as the future of aerial combat unfolded before him, knowing he was on the wrong side of history. In this scene told exclusively from Sergeant James Holt's perspective during hours 12 to 18 of the story, I'll carefully maintain his exact name while expanding the action scene of his confrontation with Captain Mara Kine's true identity. Sergeant James Holt stares at the simulation screen, his hands trembling so violently he can barely grip the edge of the control panel. The victory chime. That mythical sound he's never heard in 15 years of running these tests continues to echo through the facility's steel corridors, mocking his earlier arrogance. "Impossible?" he whispers, obsessively, refreshing the score display. But the number doesn't change 100%. Perfect execution. Every challenge cleared. Every trap anticipated. The quiet woman from logistics, the one he'd sneered at just hours ago, hasn't just beaten his unbeatable simulation. She's mastered it. The security clearance alerts begin flooding his screen, each ping driving his heart rate higher. His fingers instinctively touch the sergeant's insignia on his collar, the metal cold against his clammy skin. That morning he'd polished it proudly before challenging Captain Kine. Now it feels like it's burning through his flesh. Computer verify identity of test participant. Sergeant James Holt commands, his voice cracking. The response makes his blood run cold. Test participant identified Captain Mara Keene, call sign Night Osprey. Classification ultra top secret. Combat missions completed, redacted. Kill count, redacted. Creator of the Shadow Protocol currently used in all stealth aircraft. The facility's lights suddenly dim, emergency protocols engaging as classified files begin opening on every screen. Sergeant James Holt watches in horror as video after video plays Captain Kine executing impossible maneuvers in experimental aircraft, leading missions that were supposed to be myths, achieving things he'd dismissed as tall tales told by drunk pilots. Looking for answers? Sergeant, her voice no longer quiet and deferential, cuts through the darkness. Captain Keene stands in the doorway, her posture radiating a deadly grace he'd somehow missed before. You wanted to see my credentials. Sergeant James Holt stumbles backward, knocking over his chair. Captain, I didn't know. Clearly. She steps forward, each movement precise. You thought someone from logistics couldn't possibly understand your precious simulation, couldn't possibly have the skill to fly. Tell me, Sergeant James Holt, how does it feel to have your assumptions shattered? His insignia feels heavier with each step she takes. Through the facility's windows, he can see junior officers gathering, phones raised, recording his humiliation. The hashtag Night Osprey rises is already trending. Your simulation. Captain Kine continues, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent facility. I wrote its base code 5 years ago. Those impossible scenarios, I designed them. While you were polishing your insignia and bullying new pilots, I was revolutionizing aerial combat doctrine. Sergeant James Holt's world crumbles as she picks up his fallen chair, sets it upright with deliberate care. Tomorrow, this facility begins its restructuring. New protocols, new leadership, new standards. Standards that don't judge pilots by their department or gender, but by their skill. He watches paralyzed as she turns to address the growing crowd of officers. Their phones continue recording as she speaks. Let this be a lesson. The future of aviation doesn't belong to those who guard their power. It belongs to those who dare to soar. The sergeant's insignia finally slips from Sergeant James Holt's trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. The sound echoes like a gunshot in the silent facility. Type SOAR if you've ever been underestimated and proved them wrong. In the coming hours, as the video spreads across military channels and then leaks to social media, Sergeant James Holt sits alone in his office, watching his career and his certainties dissolve. The simulation's victory chime still rings in his ears, a constant reminder of how thoroughly his world has been upended. Captain Keene's final words to him, delivered with quiet authority, become the most shared quote of the day. Your biggest failure wasn't underestimating me, Sergeant James Holt. It was overestimating yourself. His insignia remains where it fell, a symbol of authority, now transformed into a memorial to arrogance. Sergeant James Holt stands frozen in the dimly lit simulation chamber, his once proud posture now humbled as the reality of Captain Mara Keene's identity crashes over him like a tidal wave. The insignia on his chest, the very symbol he'd polished countless times while dismissing female pilot candidates, catches the fluorescent light one final time, a mocking reminder of his arrogance. Night Osprey. Sergeant James Holt whispers the legendary call sign, tasting like ash in his mouth. His mind reels back to every snide comment, every dismissive gesture he'd thrown at Captain Keene during the simulation. The woman he'd tried to humiliate had been the phantom pilot who'd revolutionized aerial combat strategy, the unnamed genius whose techniques he'd studied religiously for years. The simulation chamber's shutdown sequence echoes through the room, a sound Sergeant James Holt had heard thousands of times before. But now, as the machinery powers down, each mechanical whir seems to carry a different weight, like the applause of technology paying tribute to its greatest master. His hands tremble as he recalls how Captain Keene had executed maneuvers he'd deemed impossible moves that had only existed in the whispered legends of the Night Osprey. "I never imagined—" Sergeant James Holt's voice cracks as he watches Captain Keene receive the presidential orders, her shoulders straight, her presence now seemingly larger than life. The same woman he'd tried to force out of the program stands as living proof of everything he'd fought against. His chest tightens as he remembers his words. Women don't belong in advanced combat simulations. The memory burns like acid. The classified documents confirming her identity as Night Osprey lay open on the console, each page a testament to years of groundbreaking missions and innovations that had shaped modern aerial warfare. Sergeant James Holt's fingers trace over the signature he'd ignored earlier, the same signature he'd dismissed as probably forged. Captain Keene. Sergeant James Holt calls out, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of prejudice crumbling to dust. "I owe you more than an apology." His hand rises in a salute, not the perfunctory gesture of military protocol, but the genuine tribute of a humbled warrior acknowledging true mastery. She turns her eyes, meeting his with neither triumph nor contempt. "The sky never cared about gender, Sergeant," she says quietly. "Only about courage and skill." The words strike him like physical blows, each syllable dismantling another brick in the wall of his biases. As Captain Keene exits the facility, Sergeant James Holt remains rooted in place, watching history walk away. His insignia feels heavier now, weighted with the responsibility of change. He knows his next task, ensuring no other talented pilot faces the barriers he so zealously maintained. The simulation chamber's final lights power down, leaving Sergeant James Holt in contemplative darkness. "Have you ever had your entire worldview shattered in a single moment?" he whispers to the empty room. "Type Osprey if you've witnessed someone shatter your prejudices." Tomorrow he'll start rewriting the training protocols he'd once used to exclude candidates like her. Tonight, he stands in the darkness, a changed man, as the legend of Night Osprey soars beyond the confines of classified documents into the light of history. Share this video to join the revolution in military aviation. Watch your Night Osprey, because legends don't ask permission to soar. The last glint of his insignia catches the light as Sergeant James Holt places it in a display case, no longer a symbol of authority, but a reminder that true excellence knows no boundaries. In the end, it wasn't just military doctrine that changed. It was the heart of a man who learned to see beyond his own limitations.